Um, I was watching at this. I want to talk on the concept of inflation. Um, because the concept of inflation has always been referred to as like a living. It's like a living, uncontrollable monster. Um, and that's the way it's presented, um in and within the political debates, and that would be throughout, you know the decades, as far as I can remember, as a child, going back, and you always heard about inflation and how uncontrollable inflation is. And I always thought to myself, as a young child, it was frightening to me, even that word, because I I grew up in a family that experienced financial distress. Like, we were never like really well off. We were always lucky enough to have um decent accommodations, but then getting the rent paid every month was always an issue, and we felt, or I felt that up. um I felt, uh Gina and Charlotte's stress levels go up every time the first of the month came around, and their arguments between each other would increase at those times. Uh, and so what I'm saying is that, even as a child, the word inflation, when you heard it on the news, because it's been a constant topic of a conversation forever, I guess, for however long the economy's been in effect. Um, so to find a way to refer to the economy and the behavior of the economy, um, other than an uncontrollable uh, monster of a machine. And as I got older and considered the concept more and more, um, I never came up with a solution to inflation. Never had that much interest in like pursuing a career or a degree of economics. But as an individual contributing member of the economy, and now my words are now being tagged and assigned within different circles of of others' existences, instead of allowing me, in other words, when someone gets on and tries to claim your work after they snuck into your apartment or your desk and stole your disk, or stole your paperwork, that you had only written documentation of ideas written down. um and so then, within all their little uh teams of unwilling participants, unwilling to accept their own personal responsibility within activities that then they all just sit around giving each other permission to have laissez-faire attitudes. Oh, we'll just go over there because we know she's always got ideas, and we'll steal her disc, and we'll steal her the papers that she had in her kitchen that she sat and within her mental and intellectual health recovery process, had a need to participate in offering positive solutions. Um, and then we'll just sit back and say, well, that's mine, she didn't, well, experience a few things that I've reported that haven't been addressed, and now you want to sit back 2 years later and say that was your idea, that I had written, uh that 2 weeks after I wrote it, wrote my ideas down, came up missing from uh the the paperwork that I had. I mean, the corruption is disgustingly, it's like a vat of fat that's just melting and spreading everywhere. Um, but the um the concept of inflation, I think, needs to be re um presented on and from a perspective of, wait a minute, this inflation isn't a living human, it's not a living entity, and yet that's the way that it's presented, an uncontrollable living amoeba of, that just grows like a cloud in the sky. Um, to even get hold of the economy by way of representing uh, the economy from a different standpoint instead of constantly from an origin of inflation, uh, is, I think, an important paradigm shift of of uh, uh, of the thinking of Americans and the programming of Americans in, and as by way, as we think about the economy, it's like everybody assumes that inflation is uncontrollable. Well, where's Mr. Greenspan now? Okay. And I think that's his name. I don't know, because I haven't followed these politicians and all these people in power for any amount of time. Um, my battery's running low, so I have to get get it plugged in. But to to get hold of inflation by way of concept and reprogramming of our minds, from a standpoint of, we can control inflation. It's not, it doesn't have to be a um constantly growing monster. um I had a conversation again, with someone at a shelter I was at, and my standpoint was so I don't want to use the word foreign. It was like my presentation to her within the conversation, and her, again, her standing in the community was a completely different title than I have ever had. I, my entire life, have only been this little, oh, let's just, oh gosh, it's here again. Here it comes again. Let's just set her to the side as quickly as possible. And that's in every conversation I've ever had or tried to have, or any new ideas I've attempted to present. But the conversation, and this conversation would have taken place around 2013, around the same time that I was fighting for custody for my child and trying to get housing and all this. So again, what I'm presenting about my own personal character is that although I've been homeless and emotionally distraught, that I have on a continual basis looked for and searched for positive solutions to not only what I was experiencing, but what could be different about uh, about the U.S. economy, or about the attitudes of the staunchly uh, ever present uh, same um, standpoints of the good old boys and all the people who have been in government for way too many years. Um, so within the conversation, I said, well, we could, as an American economy, and as we could, there could be a cap on um, income, and you can say that no one in the United States can earn more than $300,000. And you can't go get an alias. Now, see, if the concept of aliases and the extensive overuse of aliases and the corruption involved therein was not a practice that I was aware of at the time of this conversation with this particular person. Um, it is now. So, the corrupt then would say, okay, we can do that, but, I'm going to just go get an alias. And that way, I can collect 300,000 income in this name and 300,000 in this name. But, that I'm not saying that as a joke. I'm saying that uh, as a, is that what's going on? Because even as I say the words, there can be a cap of the amount of income that an individual can earn every year. And it would be a huge paradigm shift, I think. Because I don't think that that is part of it is part of a regulatory regulations of income. Um, but you can say, okay, in the United States, no longer you cannot earn more than $500,000 a year, and you can't go get an alias and earn $500,000 in several aliases. And yes, then that would limit the amount of real estate one person could own. And it would limit the amount of the amount of difference between individual incomes and and individual incomes. Um, and this person who I was having this conversation with, I don't know the circles that she traveled in. At the time, I wasn't aware of the circles of that she traveled in, but I think that she was probably a lobbyist who was planted in the shelter as like a listening ear. And so this conversation took place in a shelter with this woman who she dressed much better than I dressed. She had a much uh, um, larger, and she's also one of the women who purposefully engaged in an argument with me and then said she was going to come after me with a bat outside the shelter. And then I got thrown out, and she was allowed back in the shelter a week later, and I wasn't. But she could use the words that she was going, and I can't even remember what the argument was about. It wasn't even a heated argument. It was like she was a very different type of person than I was. So this was one of the women who, in my journey of homelessness, was one of the women who thugged me out of a position of having a bed in the shelter, because that was one of the catalyst events where I made the decision, I'm not going into a shelter again, because the women only gang up on me and have me forced out in one way or the other. That's the way I was treated, because I was not engaging in behaviors of the norm other than cigarette smoking of all the other women. And so that woman was able to threaten me physically with a bat, or not, she didn't have a bat at the time, but those were her words. And then when I came back a week later to get back into the shelter, because I can't remember uh, if they said, but I remember it was approximately a week later that I went back to get back in. And and she had been allowed back in and I wasn't. Now, how those employees interpreted in their minds that the person physically threatening uh, me was a better choice to allow to get back in after a week than myself, um, who wasn't making those kind of threats. It is beyond my again, beyond my ability to logically make sense of. Um, but that altercation